Gospel according to St. Mark, the 3rd chapter. And the crowd came together again so that they could not even eat. When his family heard it, they went out to restrain him, for people were saying, "He's gone out of his mind." And the scribes who came down for Jerusalem said, "He has Beelzebul, and by the ruler of the demons he cast out demons." And he called them to him and spoke to them in parables. "How can Satan cast out Satan? If a kingdom is divided against itself, that kingdom cannot stand. And if a house is divided against itself, that house will not be able to stand. And if Satan has risen up against himself and is divided, he cannot stand, but his end has come. But no one can enter a strong man's house and plunder his property without first tying up the strong man. Then indeed the house can be plundered. Truly I tell you, people will be forgiven for their sins, and whoever blasphemies they utter. But whoever blasphemies against the Holy Spirit can never have forgiveness, but is guilty of eternal sin. For they had said, 'He has an unclean spirit.' Then his mother and his brothers came, and standing outside they said to him and called him. A crowd was sitting around him, and they said to him, 'Your mother and your brothers and sisters are outside asking for you.' And he replied, 'Who are my mother and my brothers?' And they looked at those who sat around him, and he said, 'Here are my mother and my brothers. Whoever does the will of God is my brother and my sister and mother.'" The word of the Lord. Please be seated. Think for just a second with me about where your family lives. Go beyond perhaps your immediate family to your extended family. Perhaps your family is one of the few that can say that you all live within a few city blocks or perhaps a few country miles of one another. Or perhaps your family is like mine, stretched out about as far across the country as humanly possible. It seems, although, we've almost made an intentional stretch, despite the reasons that have pulled us from here to there. My family stretches from New York City to Phoenix to Western Washington to all the way up north. We're nearly as far apart as we could possibly be and still live in the same country. When I was younger, I remember growing up, and we would gather for every holiday meal. Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, and even a good 4th of July celebration. People would fly in from all over the country to gather. And there we would set up huge tables inside of homes, stretching us down the hallway. And I remember one Thanksgiving being at the kids' table and a senior in high school and sitting down a back hallway slightly in a bedroom in order to make room for all of us in the house, and pondering, when would I be promoted from the kids' table? Only to be discovered that then the kids' table would soon become a blanket on the floor because we were out of tables and chairs. And the idea of family, while still strong, I would argue, in the Western world, is not nearly the same as what it is in other places, other locations. And the idea of families living with and near one another in the same sense is nearly lost here, I would argue. I remember being in many countries where I would walk into a home and you would find grandparents and great-grandparents, parents, children, and grandchildren all residing under one roof. The idea of family comes to be an important. And in this season of graduations, I can't help but think about the ways in which people are moving away, going far, and while we celebrate these things, it isn't that family doesn't come with a little bit of pain, and perhaps a lot of pain as people move away, or family drama rears its head. Today we hear Jesus give a brief discourse on what it means to be family. Now, for us who often like to define the term family in bloodlines, Jesus' statement may not be all that shocking for those of us who don't live near our families. However, for the folks at this time, his words would have been appalling. The family structure was not only important for people, but it was at the center and the core of who they were. Family, to them, meant everything, defined by bloodlines. Jesus' notion of people outside of blood family being considered family was scandalous. And perhaps family's not even the right term to use. For them at that time, it was custom that children would grow into adulthood, live near their parents, oftentimes in the same household. Businesses were run by families and would be passed down from one generation to the next. Remaining loyal to the family was key for first century Jews. However, Jesus comes and challenges things that are at the core of Jewish life. Jesus hasn't come to uphold any form of status quo and make sure that everyone's feeling good about what's happening. Jesus has come, rather, with a radical message and understanding of what God is doing in the world around him and through him. Jesus is breaking the traditional understandings of what it is to be family, what it means to be the church, what it means to be a disciple of God. And his family, his friends, those who he loves, thinks he's nuts. He's trying to follow what God has called him to, not necessarily intentionally upsetting societal norms, but he has the willingness to go outside of them. The willingness to upset these things, the willingness to engage God's mission in the world. I wonder, what does this look like for us? Perhaps, could there be societal norms that need to be upset here? What pressures are on us to keep the status quo? While the traditional family structure seems not to be as pressing of a matter, there still seems to be plenty at hand where God's moving, breathing, stretching us, and calling us to think outside of the box. How are we participating in God's valuing of all people? How do we participate in God's work to make sure that everyone is fed, clothed, and has adequate shelter? How is it that perhaps people around us think that we've gone nuts? Perhaps doing things that people consider scandalous. For here we hear the gospel message of God's love for all people really is scandalous. It's hard to live together in community. It calls us to be honest and authentic. It calls us to be church far beyond family. Family's a tough one to understand. While for some of us that may seem like a really great metaphor to use, on the other hand, it comes with pain for others, for families have been tough. Perhaps there's brokenness, uncertainty, and all sorts of things going on within them. God calls us to the work of the kingdom. God calls us to so much more, beyond the structures that we know. Yes, there's great love in families, but there's also great pain and struggle. God calls us beyond the model of family that we often want to cling to. God calls us to be active in God's own work, in and through the life of Jesus Christ, by the callings of the Holy Spirit. God is in fact alive. God is moving. God is breathing and working in the structures we have and calling us outside of them. Jesus has come into this world, living, breathing, dying, and rising victoriously for you and me, redefining who we are and our relationships with one another. Rather than defining us by bloodlines, we find ourselves defined not by societal understandings, but rather by our relationship with God. As children of God, and in our baptisms, set free to participate in God's work around us. How is it that you find yourself defining yourself? Is it by the love of God who claims you unconditionally, despite what you do or don't do? May we wrestle and move. Maybe we be radical, perhaps to the point that people think we've lost it. Perhaps we break societal norms. Perhaps we upset the status quo. May we be willing to step into what God is calling us to. May we dare to act for the sake of the other. And may we be willing to move with the Spirit and participate in all God is doing. Thanks be to God. Let us rise and join in our hymn of the day, number 613.